They called it impossible. They called it ridiculous. They even called it dangerous. A combat aircraft made of wood, at a time when the sky was dominated by steel and aluminum machines with armor plating and thick metal skins. Who would be crazy enough to build something like that, let alone send it into the most dangerous missions of the Second World War? But what they didn't know was that this so-called wooden aircraft would become one of the fastest, most versatile, and most feared machines of the entire war. It would outpace enemy fighters, outrun flak, slip into targets with surgical precision, and do it all while being constructed from the same material used to make furniture, sailboats, and piano frames. Yet its performance shocked the world. This is the astonishing story of the de Havilland Mosquito, how a wooden airplane became one of WWII's fastest and most effective combat aircraft. To understand how the Mosquito came to be, we have to go back to a time when modern air strategy was shifting into high gear. In the late 1930s, as tensions rose across Europe, militaries were convinced of one thing: the future belonged to heavy, armored aircraft. The idea of speed as a form of protection, meaning simply outrun your enemies, was considered outdated. Designers everywhere were adding armor plates, defensive gun turrets, and thick metal fuselages. But Geoffrey de Havilland, the British aircraft designer whose name would later be attached to the Mosquito, believed something very different. He thought that an aircraft could be so fast and so maneuverable that it wouldn't need to rely on armor or guns at all. It didn't need to fight its way out of danger, it just needed to avoid danger entirely. The Air Ministry didn't believe him. In their eyes, no unarmed aircraft could survive against the German Luftwaffe. But de Havilland argued that a sleek, aerodynamic design, combined with powerful engines and a lightweight structure, could produce an aircraft faster than anything the enemy fielded. And he insisted that wood, yes, wood was the answer, because in wartime Britain, metal was scarce, but skilled carpenters were everywhere. When the war began, the British government was desperate for resources. Every ounce of aluminum was being hoarded for Spitfires, Hurricanes, and bombers. But wood was abundant. It didn't require heavy industrial facilities, and it was immune to the supply chain limitations strangling metal production. De Havilland saw an opportunity. Wood allowed for smooth, complex curves that were harder to achieve with metal, creating an incredibly clean aerodynamic profile. Birch plywood, balsa cores, spruce beams, these were lightweight, strong, and easy to work with. Skilled craftsmen from the furniture and piano industries could be recruited overnight, and Britain's dispersed woodworking shops could build components all across the country, reducing vulnerability to bombing raids. So when de Havilland proposed a wooden airframe, he wasn't looking backward. He was looking forward, toward a manufacturing system perfectly suited for a nation at war. Despite official skepticism, de Havilland pushed ahead with private development. His engineers began shaping a sleek, twin-engine aircraft with a narrow fuselage, a two-man crew, and surfaces so smooth that air seemed to glide effortlessly around them. The wings were built in one continuous piece of laminated wood, giving incredible strength and stability. The fuselage, constructed using a sandwich of balsa and plywood, was molded in two halves and then bonded together with casein and formaldehyde glues. The result was something almost uncanny for the time. An airframe that was incredibly light yet remarkably strong, one that resisted vibration and absorbed damage far differently from metal aircraft. And it had one more secret advantage. Wood didn't show up well on German radar. It wasn't stealth in the modern sense, but the effect was real enough to matter in night raids and reconnaissance missions. Powering this wooden marvel were two Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same engines that propelled Spitfires and Hurricanes. But by placing two Merlins side by side on a streamlined airframe that weighed significantly less than a bomber of comparable size, de Havilland created a rocket in disguise. During early tests, the prototype Mosquito astonished everyone. It achieved speeds exceeding 380 miles per hour at a time when most frontline fighters struggled to reach that number. In fact, the Mosquito soon became one of the fastest operational aircraft on the planet. Pilots joked that it could outrun anything except another Mosquito. Faced with undeniable results, military officials could no longer dismiss the design. The Air Ministry hurriedly authorized production, and Britain found itself with a revolutionary weapon. one built from timber, glue, and ingenuity. As Mosquitoes entered service, their impact was immediate. One of their earliest roles was as a high-altitude, high-speed photo reconnaissance aircraft. Stripped of guns, armor, and unnecessary weight, these reconnaissance Mosquitoes flew faster and higher than German fighters could intercept. They carried cameras capable of photographing entire cities, naval bases, and industrial centers in astonishing detail. German commanders complained that the Mosquito seemed impossible to catch. Even the high-performance Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf FD-190 had trouble reaching them. The Luftwaffe scrambled interceptors, directed flak batteries, and even experimented with special climbing tactics, but the Mosquito almost always slipped away. Its crew would return with reels of film that contributed directly to Allied planning, from the D-Day invasion to precision strikes on factories and U-boat pens. But reconnaissance was only a fraction of what the Mosquito could do. As the war intensified, the aircraft took on roles that no one initially imagined. It became a bomber, an incredibly fast, agile precision bomber capable of delivering devastating strikes with pinpoint accuracy. The Mosquito's speed allowed it to approach targets at treetop height, weaving through terrain, bouncing across ridges, and slipping under radar screens. Then, at the last moment, it would pop up, release its bombs, and disappear before defenders even knew what had happened. One legendary mission occurred in February 1944, when Mosquitoes of the Royal Air Force attacked Amiens prison in occupied France. The goal was to break open the walls and free members of the French resistance who were scheduled for execution. Flying at rooftop level, Mosquito crews hit the prison with such precision that they destroyed the outer walls and guard posts while minimizing casualties among the prisoners. Many escaped in the chaos. In another famous operation, Mosquitoes struck the Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen, performing a low-level attack so daring that it remains one of the most studied missions in WWII aviation history. The Mosquito was so fast that it eventually took on the role of a night fighter, intercepting German bombers and V-1 flying bombs. Equipped with airborne radar, these Mosquito night fighters prowled the darkness like predators. German pilots dreaded the twin points of its exhaust flames suddenly appearing behind them, a sign that the Wooden Wonder, as it was now affectionately called, had found its prey. In the defense of Britain, Mosquito units destroyed hundreds of Luftwaffe aircraft. Against the V-1 flying bombs, fast, small, unmanned weapons, the Mosquito proved particularly deadly. Its speed allowed it to chase them down and shoot them out of the sky before they reached London or other targets. Some Mosquito pilots even developed techniques to tip the wings of V-1s mid-flight, sending them crashing harmlessly into fields. Yet the Mosquito's versatility continued to expand. It became a pathfinder, marking targets at night for larger bombers. It served as an intruder aircraft, slipping into enemy airspace to disrupt German night fighter operations by attacking airfields as aircraft were taking off or landing. It acted as a maritime strike aircraft, hunting enemy shipping with rockets and bombs. In Burma and the Pacific, Mosquitoes conducted long-range reconnaissance over harsh terrain where few other aircraft could survive. The wooden structure that had once seemed like a liability turned out to be a major advantage. It resisted corrosion in tropical conditions, absorbed heavy structural stress, and allowed for quick field repairs using basic materials. Carpenters, not metallurgists, could rebuild damaged sections. A Mosquito that took hits during a mission could often return to base and with some plywood, fabric, and glue be patched up and ready again in days. The Germans tried desperately to counter this extraordinary aircraft. They developed faster fighters, like later variants of the FW-190, and even jet aircraft such as the Messerschmitt Me 262. In rare cases, these machines managed to catch Mosquitoes, but the outcomes were inconsistent. German commanders resorted to calling Mosquitoes fast pests and ghost aircraft because they seemed to appear and vanish at will. One German pilot described trying to intercept a Mosquito as chasing a streak of moonlight. Even when the Luftwaffe attempted to lure Mosquito pilots by sending decoy aircraft at specific altitudes, the British aircrews quickly adapted. The Mosquito's speed, versatility, and operational ceiling gave it an unmatched tactical flexibility. By this point in the war, the Mosquito had earned respect from all sides. British crews loved it for its reliability and handling. Its smooth wooden frame and large wing area gave it gentle, predictable flying characteristics in most conditions. Pilots described it as responsive, almost elegant, an aircraft that felt alive in their hands. Navigators appreciated the well-designed cockpit and instrumentation, which allowed them to better manage long missions at high speed. Even enemy pilots, grudgingly, admitted that the Mosquito was a superb machine. And perhaps most surprisingly, the Mosquito achieved all of this while being cheaper to produce than many metal aircraft of comparable performance. As Allied strategic bombing campaigns intensified, the Mosquito played a key role in precision strikes that minimized civilian casualties. While heavy bombers like the Lancaster and B-17 dropped massive payloads, the Mosquito was used for surgical attacks on specific buildings: courthouses, Gestapo offices, radio stations, and industrial facilities. Its ability to deliver small numbers of bombs with extraordinary accuracy saved countless lives by avoiding the need for larger area raids. One of the most remarkable examples occurred when Mosquito crews were tasked with knocking out the headquarters of the Sicherheitsdienst in The Hague. The operation succeeded with astonishing precision, destroying the top floors of the building while sparing most of the surrounding neighborhood. And throughout all of this, the aircraft's wooden construction continued to bewilder observers. Could a wooden airframe really endure the stress of combat flight? The answer was yes. Wood's natural flexibility allowed it to absorb vibrations that would crack metal panels. Its composite layering made it resistant to fatigue failure. And when the structure did take damage, repairs were often faster and simpler than anything possible with high-tolerance metalwork. The Mosquito's durability surprised even its designers. They had expected it to be fast, but they hadn't fully predicted how well the wooden composite would hold up under the harshest wartime conditions. It became clear that wood, when engineered correctly, could match or even exceed metal in specific performance categories. This surprising durability allowed the Mosquito to evolve into even more specialized variants. Some were fitted with 4 20mm cannons and 4 303 machine guns, turning the lightweight aircraft into a formidable low-level ground attack machine. Others carried powerful rockets beneath their wings, giving them the ability to smash tanks, locomotives, and ships with devastating force. The Mosquito became a weapon that commanders could shape for almost any mission. Need to intercept high-altitude bombers? Send the Mosquito. Need a fast bomber that can slip through a window of opportunity too narrow for heavier aircraft? Send the Mosquito. Need to photograph Berlin, Hamburg, or the Ruhr in broad daylight and return with the film? Send the Mosquito. Its adaptability became legendary, and soon the aircraft was performing tasks that no one else would even attempt. As extraordinary as the Mosquito's performance was, the story behind its production is just as compelling. While Spitfires and Lancasters came from giant factories filled with metal presses and industrial machinery, Mosquitoes were partly built in small furniture workshops, piano factories, cabinet-making shops, and carpentry garages scattered across England, Canada, and beyond. Skilled artisans who had spent their lives crafting wardrobes, desks, and musical instruments were suddenly shaping the ribs of wings and the graceful curves of a fuselage. These craftsmen took immense pride in their work. They knew their creations would be flown into danger, and they approached the task with a mixture of artistry and responsibility. The result was an aircraft that blended industrial engineering with handcrafted precision. During the war, over 7,700 Mosquitoes were built in various countries, and each one carried within it the fingerprints of the people who assembled its wooden frame. One of the reasons the Mosquito achieved such consistent quality was the use of standardized wooden molds. Instead of bending metal, which required heavy presses, workers shaped plywood layers in molds that ensured perfect aerodynamic surfaces. This innovation sped production and allowed smaller workshops to contribute in ways that big factories could not. In some cases, engineers even designed special jigs so that inexperienced workers could assemble components with minimal training. The war effort had transformed woodworking into high-tech manufacturing, and the Mosquito became a symbol of what could be achieved when resourcefulness met necessity. The Luftwaffe's frustration with the Mosquito only grew as the war went on. German propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels once complained that the Mosquito makes everything we have look ridiculous. Whenever the Germans reinforced their defenses against one type of attack, the Mosquito appeared in a different role, at a different altitude, at a different time of day. If enemy fighters patrolled the skies, Mosquito crews flew lower. If flak batteries strengthened at low level, Mosquitoes swooped in from above. If radar stations began detecting British bombers, Mosquitoes came in fast and low, hugging the terrain until they were almost invisible. Their unpredictability made them the perfect tool for missions that required surprise, precision, and audacity. One of the most daring uses of the Mosquito occurred when British planners turned it into a disruptor of German command and control. Rather than simply bomb factories or bases, Mosquito crews targeted meetings, ceremonies, and broadcasts. On one occasion, Mosquitoes attacked the headquarters of the Gestapo in Oslo at the exact moment a Nazi police leader was giving a speech, nearly killing him and wiping out records that the resistance feared would expose their networks. In another famous mission, Mosquitoes were sent to Berlin to disrupt a radio broadcast being monitored by the German High Command. As the program began, the sound of approaching engines drowned out the broadcast. Bombs exploded nearby, and the transmission was abruptly cut. The attack was as much psychological as physical. It sent a message: nowhere, not even the capital, was safe from this wooden menace. The Mosquito's role in disrupting German defenses extended to nighttime operations. As a night intruder aircraft, it patrolled enemy airfields during periods when Luftwaffe night fighters were most vulnerable, takeoff and landing. Mosquito crews lurked in the dark, waiting for the silhouettes of incoming German bombers returning from raids on Britain. When the bombers lowered their gear and slowed for landing, the Mosquitoes struck. With cannons and machine guns blazing, they devastated the aircraft before they ever reached the ground. These tactics were controversial, but they were brutally effective. They forced the Germans to redesign their airfield defenses, alter their operations, and divert resources from offensive missions. The Mosquito's speed and finesse also made it an elite pathfinder aircraft within the larger Allied bombing strategy. Flying ahead of massive formations of heavy bombers, Mosquitoes located targets in the dead of night and dropped flares to guide the incoming waves. This reduced the risk of bombs missing their mark and increased the accuracy of operations that could involve hundreds of aircraft. Pathfinding was dangerous work. It required precision flying, razor-sharp navigation, and nerves of steel. But Mosquito crews excelled at it. Their aircraft responded instantly to control inputs, and its stability made night navigation more manageable. Many bomber commanders credited the Mosquito Pathfinders with saving countless Allied lives simply by ensuring missions were completed with fewer repeat raids. While the Mosquito carved out its legendary reputation in Europe, it also made its mark across the globe. In the Pacific theater, Mosquito units flew long, grueling missions over jungles, mountains, and islands where humidity and heat punished every aircraft. Yet the Mosquito's wooden construction, often viewed as quirky or outdated, proved surprisingly ideal for these environments. Wood didn't corrode the way metal did, making the Mosquito more resilient in tropical climates. It was lighter, easier to repair in the field, and capable of taking off from rougher airstrips. Pilots in Burma praised its ability to stay fast even in the sweltering air. In the expanses of India, Australia, and New Guinea, Mosquitoes hunted Japanese shipping lanes, escorted convoys, and delivered long-range reconnaissance that shaped Allied strategy in remote areas of the conflict. As the war pressed on and jets began to appear in the skies, many wondered whether the Mosquito's era was coming to an end. The German Me-262 jet fighter was one of the first operational jets in history, and on paper, it could outrun the Mosquito with ease. But the Mosquito had advantages that no jet of the time could replicate. Jets required long, smooth runways that were easily targeted. Their engines were unreliable in early versions and had short operational lifespans. Me-262 pilots had to be cautious on takeoff and landing because the jet accelerated slowly at low speeds. Mosquito crews exploited these weaknesses. In fact, Mosquito intruder missions specifically targeted Me-262 bases, striking the jets during their most vulnerable moments. Even when the two aircraft met in the air, the outcomes were not always predictable. Skilled Mosquito crews used altitude, maneuverability, and tactical awareness to escape jet interceptors. And in the meantime, the Mosquito continued to carry out missions that the jets could not match. Ultra-long-range flights, precision strikes, and operations deep inside enemy territory. Despite its speed, agility, and combat record, the Mosquito had a relatively simple cockpit layout that allowed a pilot and navigator to work together seamlessly. Each crew developed an intimate understanding of the other's habits, timing, and instincts. Many Mosquito crews spoke of a kind of unspoken communication, where navigators could read the slightest muscle movement of the pilot, and pilots trusted the soft tap of a navigator's finger on the shoulder as a signal to turn, climb, or dive. At high speed, flying low over forests and towns, this team coordination became vital. A single mistake could mean disaster, but when the crew was synchronized, the Mosquito felt like an extension of their own senses. This bond between pilot and navigator became part of the aircraft's identity. It wasn't a machine you flew alone. It was a machine you flew with a partner beside you, both of you navigating danger at hundreds of miles per hour. Because the Mosquito was unarmored and relied on speed for protection, its crews needed exceptional flying skill. They learned to trust the aircraft's ability to stay stable, even during wild, evasive maneuvers. When gunners opened fire from enemy positions, Mosquito pilots weaved through valleys, skimmed treetops, and used terrain to break line of sight. German defenders were often stunned by how low the aircraft flew. Some described Mosquitoes passing so close that the blast of air shook leaves from the trees. Pilots joked that if they flew any lower, they'd need to file a flight plan through the hedgerows. Their tactics weren't just daring, they were necessary. The Mosquito's advantage was speed, and every second spent climbing or turning sharply risked giving the enemy a shot. So they stayed fast, stayed low, and trusted the agility of their wooden wings. The Mosquito's legacy grew with each mission. Its success challenged long-held assumptions about aviation engineering. At a time when everyone believed more armor and more guns were the key to survival, the Mosquito proved that the opposite strategy, removing everything unnecessary and embracing raw speed, could be even more effective. It showed that innovation didn't need to rely on exotic materials or massive factories. It could come from carpentry shops, glue mixtures, and clever thinking. It proved that a nation under siege could still produce a breakthrough design by working with what it had. And it demonstrated that aircraft roles didn't have to be rigid. A bomber could become a fighter. A reconnaissance plane could become a pathfinder. A wooden shell could carry some of the most advanced engines of its era and outperform aircraft made from steel and aluminum. In the final months of the war, as Germany's industrial heartland crumbled under Allied bombing campaigns, the Mosquito remained at the forefront of operations. It struck communication hubs, disrupted emergency meetings, intercepted enemy aircraft, and delivered reconnaissance images that guided ground advances. Its presence was constant, its impact undeniable. German defenses were exhausted, overstretched, and increasingly desperate to stop the wooden aircraft that seemed to mock their efforts. Even as jet fighters entered service in greater numbers, Mosquito squadrons found ways to stay effective. Some were tasked with chasing down the last wave of V-1 flying bombs. Others roamed the night skies to ensure German bombers couldn't mount a final offensive push. By the time Nazi Germany surrendered, the Mosquito had established itself as one of the most versatile aircraft of the entire conflict. But the Mosquito's story didn't end when the guns fell silent. Instead, it transitioned into peacetime roles around the world. Nations used it for mapping, transportation, weather research, and coastal patrols. It served in various air forces into the 1950s, performing tasks that required speed and reliability. Even as all-metal jets began to dominate aviation, the Mosquito continued to impress pilots who were lucky enough to fly it. Many described it as one of the finest aircraft ever created, a machine that combined simplicity, beauty, and raw power in a way few designs ever matched. The last operational military Mosquitoes were retired in the early 1960s, long after anyone would have expected a wooden aircraft to remain relevant. Today, the surviving mosquitoes are cherished as treasures of aviation history. Restorers and engineers who work on them speak with awe about the craftsmanship that went into their construction. They describe the scent of aging wood, the layers of plywood that still hold their strength after decades, and the remarkable way the aircraft fits together like a finely made musical instrument. Each component tells a story, not just of combat missions and daring pilots, but of the carpenters, artisans, and factory workers who built them under the pressure of wartime. When a restored Mosquito takes to the air today, its engines roaring and its wooden wings slicing through the sky, spectators are witnessing something rare, the union of engineering genius and handcrafted artistry, moving at nearly 400 miles per hour. Pilots who have flown restored Mosquitoes often say that the aircraft feels both powerful and gentle. They describe how the twin Merlin engines produce a smooth, harmonious vibration, different from what you sense in a metal aircraft. The wooden fuselage absorbs sound and tremors, giving the cockpit a unique atmosphere, alive yet serene. The controls respond instantly. The aircraft climbs with eagerness. It banks with precision. Even after all these years, the Mosquito feels like it was built to fly today, not 8 decades ago. It was ahead of its time then, and it remains ahead of its time in many ways now. The fact that a wooden airframe can produce such performance continues to astonish engineers and historians alike. The story of the Mosquito is also a story of defiance. When its concept was first introduced, the Air Ministry doubted it, dismissed it, and questioned the sanity of anyone who believed in it. But de Havilland refused to abandon the idea. He trusted the physics, trusted the design, and trusted the material. He believed that simplicity, properly engineered, could outperform complexity. And he was right. The Mosquito proved that innovation is not always about using the newest materials or the heaviest armor. Sometimes innovation is about seeing possibilities where others see limitations. It is about asking, what if speed is enough? What if craftsmanship is a weapon? What if wood, shaped correctly, can outperform metal? The Mosquito was the answer to all of those questions. This aircraft changed the way engineers thought about design. It demonstrated that materials considered old-fashioned could be transformed into cutting-edge solutions with the right engineering approach. It challenged the assumption that more metal, more weight, and more firepower were always better. And it proved that versatility, not specialization, was the real key to surviving the chaos of war. The Mosquito could become whatever the moment demanded. It could slip into enemy territory as a ghost, strike a target with surgical precision, defend the night skies over Britain, intercept bombs hurtling towards cities, guide heavy bombers through darkness, and take reconnaissance photos that altered the course of battles. Few aircraft in history have ever embodied so many roles so effectively. But beyond its military achievements, the Mosquito represents something deeper: the power of human determination under the pressure of necessity. Britain needed an aircraft that could be built without draining resources from other vital programs. It needed speed, adaptability, and range. It needed something radical. And thousands of ordinary people, craftsmen, engineers, pilots, navigators, rose to the challenge. Every Mosquito that took to the sky was a testament to what people can create when the stakes are high and imagination is allowed to flourish. In many ways, the Mosquito is not just a wooden aircraft. It is a story of unity, resourcefulness, and ingenuity, at a time when those qualities mattered more than ever. When historians look back on the Second World War and list the most important aircraft of the conflict, the Mosquito stands proudly among them. It didn't have the fame of the Spitfire, the size of the Lancaster, or the raw industrial power of the American heavy bombers. But it had something just as valuable. It could do almost anything, and it could do it better than anyone expected. It was the Swiss Army knife of the sky, capable of switching roles at a moment's notice. And because it relied on speed, intelligence, and precision rather than brute force, it changed the way the Allies conducted many of their most complex operations. Even the enemy respected it. Luftwaffe pilots who survived encounters with Mosquitoes admitted years later that it was one of the most frustrating opponents they ever faced. It didn't behave like other aircraft. It didn't lumber through the sky like a bomber, nor did it dogfight like a traditional fighter. It operated in its own category, a fast, nimble phantom that fought on its own terms. For German radar operators, the Mosquito's wooden frame created strange, inconsistent readings. Sometimes it appeared faintly, sometimes it didn't appear at all. And by the time they realized a mosquito was in the area, it was usually too late. The bombs had dropped, the photos had been taken, or the night fighters they were guiding had already been ambushed in the dark. As the war drew to a close, Mosquito crews took part in missions aimed at hastening the collapse of the German war machine. They attacked supply routes, railways, bridges, communications centers, and military installations. They attempted to suffocate the ability of the enemy to coordinate, respond, or move, and all the while they maintained the same aggressive, high-speed tactics that defined the aircraft from the beginning. There was never a sense that the Mosquito had outlived its usefulness. It remained sharp, deadly, and relevant until the very last day of fighting in Europe. After the war, many Mosquitoes were lost to the scrapyard, broken apart to reclaim materials or to make way for newer technologies. In hindsight, this loss feels almost tragic, because every Mosquito carried within it the history of a remarkable era in aviation. But the few that survived became ambassadors of a bygone age. Air museums and restoration groups have worked tirelessly to rebuild them, sometimes crafting new wings or fuselage sections using the same woodworking techniques from the 1940s. When these restored Mosquitoes fly at air shows, they draw crowds from across the world. People who have spent their entire lives around modern metal aircraft are amazed to see a wooden machine roaring past at speeds that still feel modern. The Mosquito proves, right before their eyes, that great ideas never truly age. The deeper you look into the Mosquito's history, the more extraordinary it becomes. It wasn't simply that it was fast, it was faster than almost everything the enemy built to catch it. It wasn't simply that it was versatile, it excelled in every role it was given. It wasn't simply that it was wooden, it turned that supposed weakness into a defining strength. And it wasn't simply that it was loved by its crews, it earned that love through consistent performance, forgiving handling, and unmatched reliability. The Mosquito wasn't just another aircraft in the Allied arsenal, it was a breakthrough in design philosophy. Its lessons continue to resonate. Engineers today study the Mosquito not because they want to build wooden warplanes, but because the principles behind it, lightweight construction, aerodynamic efficiency, resource-smart engineering, are timeless. Designers of racing aircraft, drones, and even spacecraft take inspiration from the idea that simplicity, correctly applied, can outperform heavier, more complex systems. In this sense, the Mosquito was not merely a success of its time. It was a glimpse of the future. For many of the veterans who flew it, the Mosquito became the defining experience of their lives. They spoke of the thrill of its acceleration, the way the countryside blurred beneath them during low-level runs, the sudden silence after shutting down its engines, and the camaraderie of the crews who trusted the aircraft and each other with their lives. Some remembered the terror of flak bursting around them. Others remembered the satisfaction of returning home after completing a mission that everyone said should have been impossible. And nearly all of them remembered the aircraft with affection. They called it the Wooden Wonder, the Timber Terror, and even the Speed Stick. But most simply called it the Mosquito, and that single name carried a weight of respect. In the end, the question remains, how did a wooden airplane become one of the fastest and most effective combat aircraft of the Second World War? The answer is that it combined everything that mattered: brilliant engineering, powerful engines, minimal weight, unmatched versatility, and a nation's collective skill in woodworking and craftsmanship. It defied expectations and redefined what an aircraft could be. Its achievements stand as proof that innovation can come from the most unexpected places, even from materials that many had dismissed as obsolete. The Mosquito became great not in spite of being wooden, but because it was wooden. And in doing so, it carved its place into the history of aviation as one of the finest aircraft ever to take to the sky. When we remember the Mosquito, we remember far more than an airplane. We remember the courage of its crews, the brilliance of its designers, the dedication of its builders, and the power of an idea that refused to be ignored. We remember a machine that outran fear, outthought the enemy, and outperformed nearly everything in its path. And as long as aircraft take to the skies and people marvel at the beauty of flight, the legacy of the Mosquito, this incredible wooden aircraft that became one of World War II's fastest combat machines, will continue to fly in our imagination.